If you have the ability to turn on your camera, we would very much appreciate that. Sippy was just mentioning that we would have loved to have a session where we all could have gotten together at our office space and really gotten to know each other. I know many of you did last month at the Heinz History Center, but it's great to see you all. We're just a little short of a month before the bus picks us up at Road of Shalom on the 10th of June in the morning, and you embark on this journey. We are recording this session, so if there's anything that you need to revisit, you will be able to do that. I'm going to share my screen as we go through a few of our logistical pieces, and then when we move to Michael, he'll be able to share his screen. All right. So again, this is our third session here together for Marching Down Freedom's Road. We're joined, of course, by myself, Ellen Resnick. I do not believe Erica is with us here today. Jackie Goldblum, who you've been getting many emails from, our seminars manager. Dr. Zipporah Sippy Gur is here with us as well, so she's going to say a few words of welcome. We have Dr. Michael Narragon, who has been taking you through the learning pieces. We have Kate Lakazowitz, who will be our CWB conduit for you on this study seminar, and Samuel Black, who you met last week, but I don't see him yet in our participants. So Sippy, I will turn the microphone over to you. You said you'd like to say a few words.
Yeah, I am so excited to meet all of you. I only know you from the applications, and I hope I have a chance to really get to know you and what you teach, and hopefully when you come back, we'll be able to talk about how you can apply what you are learning on this unbelievable experience. And now that you're part of Classroom, you'll be able to join into other things with us. I definitely will meet you at the bus when you go. I'm just really sad that that's one trip for the first time since I started and founded Classroom Without Borders that I'm not going on, because we are supporting over 70 educators to Poland, and I have to leave on Wednesday for that study seminar. So I know it will be an unbelievable experience for you. I'm very thankful to Dr. Michael Norgan, to Kate, to Samuel Blacks for leading the trip, and for my team, Jackie, Ellen, and Erica, that have been working really hard to make sure that everything will be organized. I just want to say one thing about COVID, and it's very serious. COVID is not over. I'm going to ask you to be very careful a week before you leave. Don't hug and kiss people, and stay away, because it's not a joke. You're going to be on a bus, and luckily for us last year, when everybody took groups and many were sick, we took 4 different groups and really had only one case in each, in 2 of the study seminars. I'm very serious about it. I would like you to test before you get on the bus. I mean, we are going to use the honor system. And in that case, it's so easy because you're going to be in this country. I hope nobody will get sick, but God forbid, if one of you is sick, you'll just have to go back by yourself, you know, and we'll have to separate you immediately from the group. So take it seriously. Thank you. Any questions? Okay. So Ellen, you can take it from here.
Fantastic. I'm going to hand it over to Jackie. Jackie, do you have any words of wisdom or things that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, sure. I have just a heads up that in the coming after next week, I'm going to be sending out the a couple of waivers, online waivers, and that would be a COVID waiver, a photography waiver. We do have a videographer that is on the seminar with us. And also with his assistant. And we also will have a cancellation acknowledgement at this point. For everybody on the trip, everything looks good. Most of you have paid in full. We had some new people come into the trip. So I've been in back and forth with you, and Daniela, I just received your email. So thank you for that heads up. And so that's it. Reach out to me if you have any questions once again. Oh, I did want to mention something for those of you who are coming, from a bit of a distance, or something's difficult for you with travel, you don't have somebody to drop you off. I have arranged at Road of Shalom for those, we're not hoping that everybody will take this up because, they have their parking lot. But for those that really need to park their car there for the week, I will let them know the license number and the type of car. I know some people come from way out, and it may not be convenient for a friend or family member to drop you off that early in the morning. But if you can get there and not take your car, it's probably better. I know I feel better when my car's at home, but I do have that convenience, and we do, it's a nice, secure parking lot. That's it. Thank you. Ellen, you're up.
Fantastic. And we will have some CWB essentials ready for you when you join us on June 10th. We'll have a t-shirt, a hat, a mask, some other essentials. We'll have luggage tags, things like that, as well as your name tags. The name tags will, of course, have your name, your school, and then we'll have all the contact for all of the hotels, as well as emergency contacts, names and emergency numbers for you there as well. So without any further ado, I also wanted to remind everyone of the seminar pages. It is linked to our, has all the resources, including a packing list. It has the resource book that Michael has put together. It has some other pieces as well. So the password is there for you. I'll drop it in the chat in just a moment when I stop sharing this screen. If you can't access it, as some people couldn't, I can give you access on the back end. So do make sure that you send me an email and let me know if you're having difficulty. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael. We will stick around. Oh, there's Samuel there. We will stick around at the end. So if you have any individual questions you'd like us to answer, we certainly can do that as well. All right, Michael, the floor is yours.
Well, it's great to see everybody. Hi, Sam. How you doing?
Hi.
Sam, is there anything you would like to say at the start here? We're just about to get our little party started. I want to make sure I make space for you as well.
I'm not sure what I should say. I think I know everybody from previous meetings.
Great.
I'm just ready to get going.
We're ready to rock and roll if you are then.
Yeah.
So I'm about to drop into the chat a link, which I believe everyone was sent electronically, but I just want to put it in there again. But I believe this is a folder that you can all access. If you could be so kind as to open that up in your own browser, I'm going to share my screen so you can see it as well. But I was wanted to have it in front of you when we get started. As you're doing that, I want to see how's everybody doing. Does anyone have any questions before we begin? Anything that you noticed either in the news or anything along those lines you want to lay before us and have a conversation about real quick? I see nothing. All right, fantastic. If you change your mind, please let me know. So hopefully you can see the drive itself. So this is hopefully what you are able to witness when you pop in that link. So if anyone has any trouble, please raise your hand. Ellen and Jackie, because I can't see them right now, will take care of business. But I wanted to let you know what I had done and the purpose for this, because when we were last gathered when Sam hosted us so nicely at the Heinz History Center, I asked, what do people want from our next session? And somebody said, it'd be fantastic if we could have some more resources linked to the Pittsburgh situation. And so I pulled together some material for it. I just wanted to let you know sort of what's behind them, because otherwise it's just a series of documents and standalone folders. And I wanted to let you know that I actually had some rationale behind it as well. So first and foremost, simply because Sam is here, I want to give a little shout out. I found the Western Pennsylvania article on Soul Soldiers when that exhibit was up. And so if you're looking for an insight into the Black soldiers' experience with a Western Pennsylvania focus during the Vietnam era, this is a great article. It's a nice little PDF that starts us off. But many of these articles focus around schooling itself. And I've noticed in my own teaching of the Black freedom movement that one of the constants that seems to run through my piece is the centrality of school. In fact, I like it so much that when I spelled Pittsburgh school desegregation, I put up a couple extra O's in there just for good measure, apparently. But if you click open this piece here, this is a series of documents that I have found in the vertical files at the Carnegie Library. And I tried to arrange them as chronologically as I could. Sometimes the dates are a little questionable based on it, but if you click on them, and I'll just pick one here for you, you see there are a bunch of newspaper articles that you can use if you wanted to trace the history of school desegregation in Pittsburgh, running from 1959 all the way down to, well, 1996, amongst other things, but down to 1979, with a nice series of step-by-step, inch-by-inch ways in which the city of Pittsburgh grappled with the concept that the civil rights movement was actually national in scope rather than regional in scope. And I think for us as educators, that's a fantastic thing to teach our students, is that while there was efforts to desegregate schools that we most normally associate with the Brown versus Board of Education in Little Rock, Arkansas, there are efforts here in Pittsburgh as well to gain the same thing. And so those are all for you here in the school desegregation piece. And then many of these articles deal with historical accounts of desegregation in the city of Pittsburgh, and then work that remains to be done, amongst other things. And then, of course, I have profiles of some folks like Bird Brown and Nate Smith, who are central figures in the civil rights movement in the city of Pittsburgh. And you'll find them in Larry Glasgow's article as well. And then there are several articles about 50 years after Martin Luther King's assassination and 50 years after there was the uprising in the Hill District. There are these articles looking back on those moments, and it helps you ground your investigation in a sense of place and space. But then again, it also provides you with names of people who are active in the community at that time. There's another nice Heinz History Center. I'm plugging away for you here, Sam. But another nice Heinz History Center exhibit on it was called 1968. And this overview helps situate the civil rights movement in Pittsburgh in a much broader social movements setting in and of itself. And then beyond the South is a look at Washington County, Pennsylvania. And then there's this piece here, which I think is quite nice. It was an effort by some Pittsburghers who had participated in efforts in 1968 and other times to draw parallels and connections to the Black Lives Matter movement in Pittsburgh in and of itself. And it's a very nice article you can use easily in a classroom. All right, so there are a lot of resources in there, in other words, that can introduce you some of the names, the places, and the spaces, and also some of the dynamics behind the civil rights movement. If you wish to provide your students with an overview, however, you can go to the Torchbearers. Torchbearers was a fantastic, and I believe I have it for you right here. It was a fantastic, almost hour-long documentary, and if you click on the link, it will take you to this YouTube site about the movement in Pittsburgh in and of itself, and it contains firsthand accounts with many of the folks who were leading the way. It's a great sort of overview of civil rights in the city of Pittsburgh, and it certainly can be used within a classroom setting to begin to unpack who was who and who tried to accomplish what. And then the last piece, and then I will stop for just a second, is a series of timelines. And if you could be so kind as to open that on your own browser, I would appreciate that, because you'll find in it several different timelines. And I would ask that you crack open well, there are two timelines, the legal one from the Library of Congress, and then one says civil rights timeline. And I'll tell you what I was up to. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. At least I think I'm going to do that. There we go. All right, so that was a lot of exhaustive resources, but I hope that helped respond to the person who wished to have more resources grounded in the city of Pittsburgh. But the first thing I wanted us to do is spend a little bit of time looking at the timelines I assembled for you, because I brought together several different kinds, and they all start at different spots, and they all involve different material. And one of the exercises I think we could do with our kids when we get to the end of a unit is ask them to construct a timeline now that they know the material. Oftentimes we provide students with timelines and we forget that constructing a timeline is really an active interpretation. When do you start? How do you periodize it? What should be noted? And so if you take, I'm going to give us 10 minutes in Zoom world, just take a look at these different timelines. What do you notice? What reactions do you have to them? Maybe we'll take 15 minutes. What do you notice? What reactions do you have to them? What feedback do you have? Does one appeal to you more than another? And then we'll have a conversation, okay? So does everybody have access to those different timelines? Okay, there are two folders. Within the one that says Civil Rights Timeline, not the legal one, there are 3 different ones embedded in it as well, okay? All right, so let's take a couple minutes. Thank you so much. Cephas.
All right.
So
Well,
yeah, so
I'm not
Cephas, what do you got for me?
social studies teacher, so I feel very self-conscious. But I liked the if your question was which timeline did I prefer the one that's the legal timeline. I actually printed it out the other day. I just love the way it goes practically from the time the Pilgrims got here. Was that 1620? I mean, it starts in 1640. I just like the way it starts in 1640 and goes all the way up to 2014. And it kind of just sort of shows that this is, you know, the freedom movement is an ongoing thing. And whereas the other one kind of, I don't know, what does it start with? Civil War and ends with the civil rights movement in 1964. So I just love this because it shows just, you know, just that, I don't know, it just gives so many examples of different things, and it's throughout the entire history of the US. So that's why it appeals to me.
Thank you, Cephas. And you shouldn't be self-conscious as a non-social studies teacher. That was a fantastic response. Who would like to add to that? Go ahead, Sam.
I'm going to take a little more critical view of it. When I looked at everything, and especially the timelines, For civil rights history, African-American organizing is central, it's vital. It doesn't appear in those timelines until 1910 with the NAACP. It doesn't talk about the National Equal Rights League that was organized in 1864 that began to lobby state legislatures to ratify the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. That led into more political organizing, all before the fall of Reconstruction. So Black organizing was very important in this period from the end of the Civil War and that 9 or 11-year period until Rutherford B. Hayes's election. And then you had other organizations, the Afro-American League in the late 19th century, early 20th century, all preceding the NAACP, women's organizations. All of that really feeds into the civil rights movement that we either lived through or we got to know. So there is a foundation, but it doesn't really appear in that outline. And I think that was very critical, because if you just read that outline, don't know the history of the background, you think, oh, well, African-Americans didn't really get involved until 1910. And so that's a little misdirection, I think.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. What else? Owen, what did you all think over there?
I was struck by how active the Johnson administration was in the 1960s and how, well, I mean, from the history of the Vietnam War, I sort of thought of Lyndon Johnson as a reactionary figure. But then it came to mind that, well, African-American voters would have been an important part of his constituency. Expanding civil rights would have been an important attempt on Johnson's part to build a legacy of doing something progressive. So maybe it makes sense after all, but I was surprised by the entries that went on and on and on in the midst of the 1960s.
Kate, you're smiling.
You already know, Michael, that I have an unabashed love for Lyndon Johnson. So I will look forward to elaborating on that as we travel together.
Gotcha. Christy, what are you thinking?
I was just thinking that it was interesting, like the Jim Crow Museum timeline ended with Obama, like as if that was sort of like the end of anything that needed to be discussed. Although, I mean, I think that's through Ferris University, right? Is that the Jim Crow? Yeah,
yes, that's correct.
So I thought that was interesting. Maybe there was more to it and we just didn't see it. But and then the other one of the other ones that you had ended in 2013 and sort of focused mostly on, African-American civil rights, rather than some of the other timelines you had included disabilities and other groups that fought for their civil rights as well. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and that's as far as the Ferris one goes. I gave you everything that they had. They haven't
really
updated their timeline since 2008. Yeah, it is very interesting considering how alive we think the digital world is.
Yeah.
Greg, what are you thinking, Greg?
I spent a little bit of time in the the pre-Civil War area with the legal timeline. And I was struck by the fact that the Dred Scott decision says that all Blacks, free or slave, were not and could not become citizens of the United States. And then you have the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, Fugitive Slave Act in 1864, the 13th Amendment in 1865, and then all these other things. But it says in the Civil Rights Act of 1866 that equal rights for all people, but I'm going to guess that was only for men, right? Because it wasn't like women weren't allowed to vote. So it was interesting how it went from this, it could not, were not and could not become citizens. And then 6 years later, we're saying, you know, what happened in that 6 years, that there's such a huge shift, even though that was a civil, you know, a Supreme Court decision. So is that, I know we could spend the next, 24 hours talking about the reasons for the Civil War, but it seems like that's a huge shift in 6 years. And was that all because was the legal actions there in 1863, 64, 65, and 66 all, like a response to the South just saying, but that the fact that Dred Scott decision was for the entire United States, not just the North or the South. I hadn't looked at it that way.
Yeah, it's really about overturning the Supreme Court's decision, that the flurry of amendments, as well as trying to make good on the sacrifices African Americans had made both behind the lines as soldiers during the Civil War itself.
Was that the same Supreme Court the whole time?
Not entirely, but close enough.
Okay.
Any other observations?
Yeah, I'll chime in.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi, how is everyone doing? I would have liked to seen a little more inclusion of resistance, uprisings, as well as some more, I guess, legal challenges. And I also would have liked to seen some more inclusion of, I guess, the suffrage movement, because there was a lot of interaction, especially in the Northeast, between the abolitionists and the suffragist movement, and they were kind of intertwined for a great deal of time. So I think that was absent in these lists.
Anybody else? Sarah, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, sorry, my computer glitched a second.
Apologize.
So it's, I mean, I like it. I like the timelines, but I was thinking that there should be something about the ADA, 504, the Americans with Disabilities rights, and I didn't feel like that was included too much. I see age discrimination. So I mean, there's things outside of what we might consider traditional civil rights, but maybe a little bit more on disabilities.
Michelle, are you raising your hand, or are you just moving in front of your camera? Gotcha. Jacqueline, Nancy, would you like to chime in? Gloria?
I can go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah, you're
Jacqueline.
okay. I think both of the timelines have like a specific purpose, just in understanding how much of civil rights is connected to politics and legal documents, which is something that I think our students don't necessarily realize, which could be connected to, the importance of voting and just paying attention to government and leadership in general. One thing that I did notice that I would have liked to see a transition to, but this would possibly be a whole nother timeline, is when it talks about the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. It doesn't talk about the clause in the 13th Amendment that still allows slavery to continue through the criminal justice system. And so seeing that timeline of that clause in the 13th Amendment transitioning into the disproportionate rates within like the criminal justice system and arrests would have been an interesting viewpoint to take a look at.
Oh, I agree. And in fact, what's running through all your comments? I mean, this is really fascinating. So what is running through sort of the essence of what it all is you're saying?
Hey, I would like to
Oh,
say.
hey, go ahead. Yeah, oh, please, go ahead,
'cause
please. I'm
that's what
sorry.
I was thinking. I don't usually use timelines in my teaching.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering how the form actually leads to more questions, right? So that it suggests
Mm.
progression, but where could we notice a big jump or a return or a tension between this list and between the items in the list? So I don't use timelines, and I wondered about what we just heard. Like somebody had just said, like, what's the purpose of this timeline? What's the purpose of this? And thinking about it more like that for under purpose or under what's missing, of course.
Ah, good. Can we build on this comment? So if something is missing, what is it? What is this? I'm trying to think how to phrase this. What's really being revealed as you describe what could or should be included and what should have greater accent and what should be inserted here? What is really being revealed in all of this?
If
Candace, go ahead, please.
Again, I'm new to the social. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Again, I'm new to the social studies scene as well, but my first view of it was author's intent. And so as I read through, just looking at trying to consider, and of course I do not have an exhaustive knowledge of history, so there's definitely a lot of things I probably wouldn't know was missing, but I do pay attention more to the spaces between the years that are listed and what could possibly have taken place in those. And the other part was just more so my reflection in that, looking at all the different efforts that had taken place, the speaking, the walks, the marches, the sit-ins, the speeches, and all that, whereas so many other groups came about and then had momentum and mobility utilizing those same methods, whereas still at this point, the rights of African Americans are still kind of in the same place. So it's like having those actions, initiating a lot of those, and then other groups taking on some of those same practices had more success at getting to a space where they wanted to be, opposed to where some of the beginning of this history's pushback and resistance had. So that was just kind of like my reflection. And then also I wanted to comment too, I did mention notice the missing of the ADA being part of that community as well. Notice that wasn't in there. So that's what made me think about what else truly is missing.
Ah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Candace. Sam, you had your hand up?
Yes. In reference to your question about the missing or what the sort of unspoken theme or whatever it is, especially a Library of Congress list is sort of a top down. And when you do that, for instance, when I look at George Washington becoming the first president, I need something else to convince me that's connected to civil rights. John Quincy Adams defending the Amistad. I need something else to tell me that has a connection to civil rights. There are numerous cases, because it's mostly a lot of legal cases, laws, and acts that are listed there. But if you skip over the 1830s in Pennsylvania, the Craig case and a number of others that became very monumental leading up to the Civil War, the succession. You can't leave those out. And that's why I made the comments I made earlier. But in a sense, what has happened with these lists is that the activists themselves are not present in the list. And you got the NAACP, but 5 years prior to that, you had the Niagara movement, which was extremely pivotal. So I don't want to feel that, maybe the list should be more detailed, but I do think that, when you make a list like this, it's sort of, again, I'm gonna go back to my comment earlier, what role did African Americans play in this movement? Did they only appear in 1910 moving forward? And that's not what the historic record indicates. So to me, it's a little problematic. It's good stuff, but it's sort of problematic.
Great, thank you. Greg, you're unmuted. Did you want to respond to that as well? Nope. Maybe he's. Greg? Did you want to respond as well? You're unmuted. I didn't know if you were waiting to participate or not.
No.
Okay, I want to miss an opportunity. Michelle, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I don't have my computer, so I'm trying this on my phone. So that's why I'm a mess right now. But okay, so I don't know about the timeline, but I did notice a big thing was in the anti-lynching laws finally been passed. It's a pretty newer thing, and we really concentrated on that this year and explaining to my students a lot about time. Time to students, high schoolers or even younger kids. It's like trying to get them to understand time. And Emmett Till, he could have been your grandfather. Understanding that this isn't black and white. A long time ago, I think we talked about that a little bit already, but lynching law just being passed they think lynching is so long ago and so far away, and so making them understand this is not far, and these are people. And I think timeline sometimes takes that out of that. So maybe the timelines is really about people. And even World War II, having them understand that World War II, it was segregated. People were over there fighting, but they couldn't be in this. They had to be separated. And so when we're talking about World War II, saying all of these people were over there fighting, but just because of the color of their skin, they couldn't be, they weren't treated as every other soldier. I mean, they were fighting for America, but weren't treated the same. I mean, I think they realized that it was a little bit of an eye opener. So, I mean, I think understanding that more than timelines is important as well. I think, I don't know if that's.
That makes me think, actually, Michelle, this idea of 20 years as a generation, which I'd never understood, because as a member of a family, I know 80-year-olds and I know 10-year-olds. I mean, and like, I had never understood why that would be a generation, except for fashion desire, for like, oh, this is cool and this is not cool. But when it comes to history, like everybody is situated and they can reach 100 and 100 years in front, and maybe 50 years ahead. I don't know how that works, but
right.
I like what you're saying, like a story, and having the story be, okay, where are you in this timeline? How far away are you? How many grandparents are you away from the
And
lynch?
they know Boomer now, and they know Gen Z, they know that. They sort of get that. So, I mean, I don't think we ever really talked about boomers and that kind of stuff, but they're all into that. So getting that down, I think it's important that they see that this isn't that far away, or even if it is far away, just understanding some of the timeline is obviously far away, but understanding that these are people and that this is is very important, But real quick, you started this about current events. Were you talking about Emmett Till's accuser that just passed away in your timeline, Michael?
Me?
At the beginning of this.
I was just throwing it open to see if anybody had anything they wanted to chat about in general, though that is an interesting connection. Did you want to say something about that, Michelle?
Well, she just died. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was, I was proud of my students because a lot of them, I actually posted it on Teams, and it was sad. None of them, they all came to me like, oh, did you hear who died? I'm like, well, I posted it on Teams, and none of them read my post, but they all came in with all this news. And I was like, well, I guess I should just be happy they came in with the news. But so they were all, but I think that was amazing too. Like, she just died. And like, see, I mean, and she was the adult, she was the adult. Emmett was, a child. So, realizing again that she just died. So it was another like, wow, okay. I mean, they knew it, they got it, I think, but just to see it again, that she just died. And then, they were saying things like, and she still nothing ever happened to her. And I'm like, no, I know, I told you that. But, just to see it in the paper or hear it again, I think it was, a couple of them were a little, they were taken aback or wanted to say something and bring awareness to me that she had died. And, I was thankful that they wanted to let me know, but yeah.
They're those great moments when what we do in the classroom splashes into the headlines in the news. And when they make those connections, those are worth their weight in gold.
Right.
Elena, were you raising your hand or were you just moving towards the camera? Oh, okay. All right, great. So I think there's something really powerful. Oh, I'm sorry. Nancy, did you want to say anything? I apologize. I called and asked if you did, and then I didn't give you space. Okay. So what's really interesting to me is I hear us grappling with what, timelines capture the march of chronology. And I find that having the action, this is how weird because it's a timeline, but having the date as the organizing framework starts to obscure some of what everybody's talking about, because the date seems to suddenly transcend these other movements that we want to talk about. And so if we are engaged in looking at a movement of peoples, that's hard to capture by a specific date, because organization and self-organization, especially the kind that Sam is talking about, that happens over a period of years. It's a set of processes that happen that suddenly you have the NACW in place, but you have all the organizational efforts ahead of it, and you have the grassroots mobilization. People show up for protests, right? And that's the one thing we have to remember to our students. When people are advocating for change, having those people show up in the streets is a really important thing for those people who are showing up in the streets. And they're not there simply because someone led them. They're also there because they're pushing leaders in directions they don't always intend to go. And I think it's that nice little synergy that we get between, as Sam was describing, top-down organizational framework and grassroots bottoms-up mobilization that really does lend movements a special little heat. And we'll see that when we go to Lowndes County, where we're going to really see how hard it is to capture the history of people in motion as opposed to a central figure who is speaking. And as teachers, we have to always keep our eyes on the notion that these are two very different, though interrelated processes that really do matter to our students. Because if we put the accent mark on those who are organizing themselves, we're reminding our students that they have that agency to do the same, amongst other things. But I also noticed what was really interesting is hearing us try to grapple collectively with, to what extent is this about civil rights, which is in some respects a very legalized category about status within a specific state, I apologize, and what is it about freedom? And civil rights funnels us towards an outline that is very much driven by this law, this law, and this law. And a freedom movement actually has a much more expansive notion, which makes space for the grassroots mobilization in really dynamic ways, and also has space for winning civil rights, but then also has space for the demand for economic rights and social standing as well. And so what we choose to put at the center, the drivers behind this, really do shape what gets in and what gets left out. And I don't use in timelines either in my teaching, but I do like students to tell me what ought to be included in a textbook. Because if you get them to tell you what ought to be included in a textbook, they have to make those decisions about what gets left in, what gets left out. And in the process, they're telling you what they think this period or this movement is about, amongst other things. So there's a lot I think that we can gain from using something like this. But I also wanted us to grapple with this. And if you could be so kind, I'm assuming you'll bring your phones and whatnot on the trip, but if you could have some access to these electronic sources, that'll help us a lot when we get to different spaces and places, because sadly, we're not going to travel in chronological order. And so when we hit Greensboro, we're going to start in the middle of some of these unfolding moments. And so it's important to sort of see where they fit within the chronologies that we have on our collective intellectual belts. All right. Is there any questions? Because I want to switch gears ever so slightly. Okay. I want us to go back to that drive, and I want to try to give you some insight into some of the concepts that I think are going to be percolating throughout our entire movement, our entire trip, and also about why we chose the title that we did for this particular session. So if you could go back to that drive and click on the Let America Be America Again, what I'd like us to do is sort of get inside. This is a Langston Hughes poem written in 1938, in which Langston Hughes is making a very plaintive cry in some respects, but is also really pounding on the walls. And what I'd like us to do is sort of try, what is it that Langston Hughes is writing about? What is he communicating? What does he mean by let America be America again? It's a really interesting turn of the phrase. So if we could take just a few hot minutes and read through this and have some more conversation like we just had, I'd be really appreciative. So does anyone have any trouble getting to that? Michelle, can you access that on your phone? Okay. So what is Langston Hughes's essential message in 1938? What's he saying in not so many words? Or what did you take away from it? Did anything sort of surprise you, shock you, stand out to you? Sam?
I think what Langston is basically saying is that he understands what America stands for, what its creed is, but that has not been extended to African Americans and others. He mentioned others in the piece as well. I think that's very, very critical. And so he's really saying, you know, America has never been America to me. But then closer to the end, he sort of challenges himself and the reader to, you know, make America America for you in a sense. I thought it was very powerful. I first read that when I think I was probably an undergraduate, college. But it's a very, very powerful, as you can see, it's written in 1938, right before World War II, right around a period where there's a push to have more Black officers in the U.S. Army. You know, so a lot of things were going on at the time that he wrote that poem.
Yeah, thank you so much. Christy, you raising your hand? Oh, okay.
I was going to say though, I mean, it seems like he's denouncing the whole idea that the U.S. is a meritocracy, right? It's really based on white supremacy, and that it's been used to drive these groups apart. The poor whites, for example, and the immigrants, and this whole idea of dog eat dog, and the mighty. I like his lines about the mighty rush the weak, and about greed and power. I mean, that was what I was sort of struck me as reading it.
Yeah, sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. From those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take back our land again, America. I mean, it's just boom. I mean, it's just powerful in your face. What else did you notice? Anything else sort of stand out and pop out to you?
Well,
Sarah, go ahead, please.
Okay. He mentions, you know, America was never America to me. And it just made me think, because I have my kids analyze his poem, I Too. And in there, he asserts, you know, I too am America. I too am part of this. So it's interesting how he can kind of describe that I'm connected to this, but at the same time, like, you're trying to make it so I am not, but I am, you know, I'm still here in that resilience, I guess, that he kind of brings up in both poems.
Nice. You know, Cephas, I'm going to come to you eventually, so get yourself ready. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, Elena, please. I'm sorry. Take me a while to find you. I got you.
That's okay. I think, and I'll preface this like Cephas did earlier, I'm not an educator, but what I see in this is, in addition to saying, you know, America is not America for me, he's saying America is not America, period. America is not living up to its aspirations and its dreams when he's talking about, you know, the ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, of grab the land, grab the gold. That's not, you know, even if you were talking about America for, you know, in a white supremacist sense, that's not nice either, because of course you've got the poor white fooled and pushed apart. So he's not saying he just wants America to be America for him and for the, you know, Native American and you know, and the immigrants. He wants America to be America for everybody, because it never has been.
Yeah.
I also want to say, I know, oh, sorry, Michael.
No, please go ahead. I said, please.
Okay.
That's all.
I won't go on and on about the poem, but I love this poem, and I could talk about it for a long time. So I will say, I love a couple things in particular, how it's this epic in which he is working really hard at including everything, including everyone, and making every like sign, looking to the left, to the right, all over, so that the argument, and you guys already said, I agree, like, it's existential. America cannot be when he is not considered equal in America. It's as if, like, you can get 99%, but if you got 1%, then the dream is not real. The whole thing is a lie. So I think the length of the poem makes that point, that the drive of his voice is like, I have thought of that, and I have thought of that, and I've seen this, and I've seen this, and let me remind you. And but again, he does end with it returning to a dream. So there's that hope at the end, which it redeems all of us. It's a great poem.
Yeah, that notion that we the people must redeem. I mean, just to sort of steal the line you have fed me. Yeah, very, very powerful. Cephas, what do you got for me?
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand.
So notice it's, oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet and yet must be, right? And I love that notion that it has not yet arrived, but just simply has to, because the notion of the Black freedom and Black civil rights are part of the American story and the American narrative, and that American democracy is the story of Black freedom and about the notion about, as Danielle was pointing out so nicely, of that inclusion. It raised a wonderful question as to who the founders actually are in this American experiment. We tend to make them 18th century cutout figures and turn them into musicals, if you will. But I think if we take a much more dynamic notion and build on Sam's concept that we have grassroots mobilization that is as powerful and as important as the top-down piece, suddenly we have a much more expansive notion of who we the people are, but also who the founders actually are, and where that founding is a much more active piece. And I also wanted to, but I'm going to be judicious of our time. It reminded me of this piece as well by Mary McLeod Bethune, who gives this speech also in 1938, in which she talks about the centrality of Black freedom for the existence and survival for democracy. And clearly, I think both Hughes and Bethune are writing out of their own lived experiences, but also with an eye towards what's happening around the globe as the forces of totalitarianism are really surging anew. This is a very powerful speech, and the best part about the link I just gave you is I believe it's got her voice along with it. And I always love putting other people's voices in the classroom itself, because I think people should be heard on their own terms. But I love pairing the Langston Hughes poem with the Bethune speech, because the different audiences really shape the way in which the language comes out. But I think the message has a lot of overlap, like one of those little Venn diagrams that I always draw so badly on the board. So I throw that out for you. Any questions, any final thoughts before I turn to our last little shared activity?
I can go.
Oh, go ahead, Jacqueline. Thank you.
I like and it's very subtle, but this idea of protest connected to making America America again, right? And historically, you can see that that is how people have achieved their freedom and their rights, is through protests and coming together. And it's very subtle, but it's there, and connected to mobilization in order for America to be America again. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for adding that. It's a valuable angle to remember, that this notion of mobilizing people on behalf of their liberties and their freedoms is actually the quintessential element of what should be the American story. And I love that Hughes is writing about the need to make sure we have space for that in order to be transformative. Go ahead, Sam.
Just one last thing.
Please.
And it's great you showed the Bethune piece as well. And the fact that they were both written in 1938. This was just a few years after a group of African Americans were invited to the Soviet Union. And they received a great deal of criticism. Hughes was a part of that. Bethune was not a part of that, but it was mostly Black artists, political thinkers, sociologists, actors, and so forth. Who went to the Soviet Union. And Hughes received a great deal of criticism because he was recognized as one of the sort of stars of Black literary world.
Yes.
I mean, it sort of slowed him down a little bit, but within I would say 10 years or so, you begin to have the McCarthy hearings.
Yes.
But it was, when I read that poem, and I understand it was written in 38, and I understand that I think it was around 31 or 33 that group went to the Soviet Union to kind of put all of that into play and what he's really trying to address there. I thought it was a great piece. I'll have to read Bethune's piece a little closer. But the fact that they were both leaders of the community at that very critical time, and you had a growing Black communist community all across America at that time, publishing newspapers. And
if you really want a great book on that, Kate, we're going to say something. I'm sorry. No. A great book on that is a book by Robin D.G. Kelly called Hammer and Hoe, in which he looks at Black self-organization around what becomes actually the principled foundation of the modern civil rights movement, to be honest with you, in the 50s and 60s, nonviolent direct mass action on behalf of political and economic rights. It's a great book that looks at Southern sharecroppers and rehabilitates the names of people who were trying their very best to break down Jim Crow on behalf of democracy and personal safety. It's called Hammer and Hoe. I love that book, but it's not about me. So I have one final piece for you here. And I want to ask you to go one last time, go back into that folder, and you should see the Freedom Road song, if you could be so kind. And I'm going to do something that may or may not work because I've always had a terrible time trying to share music, but I'm going to do my best. So bear with me. Does everybody have the lyric sheet up? Awesome. Okay. Wish me luck. Oh, wait. Boom.
That's why I'm marching. Yes, I'm marching. Marching down freedom's road. Ain't nobody gonna stop me, nobody gonna keep me from marching down freedom's road. Hand me my gun, let the bugle blow loud. I'm on my way with my head up proud. One objective I've got in view is to keep a hold of freedom for me and you. That's why I'm marching, yes, I'm marching, marching down freedom's road. Ain't nobody gonna stop me, nobody gonna keep me from marching down freedom's road. Ought to be plain as the nose on your face. There's room in this land for every race. Some folk think that freedom just ain't right. Those are the very people I want to fight. That's why I'm marching, yes, I'm marching, marching down freedom's road. Ain't nobody gonna stop me, nobody gonna keep me from marching down freedom's road. Now Hitler may rant, hero, he too may rave. I'm going after freedom if it leads me to my grave. That's why I'm marching, yes, I'm marching down freedom's road. United we stand, divided we fall. Let's make this land safe for one and all. I've got a message and you know it's right. Black and white together, unite and fight. That's why I'm marching, yes, I'm marching, marching down freedom's road. Ain't no fascist gonna stop me, no Nazis gonna keep me from marching down freedom's road.
Sorry, I have the next song queued up on YouTube and it started to go in my ears, which was Peggy Seeger's I'm Going to Be an Engineer, which is a great song, but a very different setting for that one. So there's so much in this song. Again, Langston Hughes, but Josh White setting it to music. And maybe we can make sure that we say something about what happens to Josh White after World War II before we close. But what did you notice was happening in this Langston Hughes poem that Josh White set to music as World War II broke out? Go ahead. I saw it, and he was all blurry. He was in the background. I just saw this disembodied hand come out of nowhere. Go ahead.
Thanks, Michael. That Langston Hughes and a group of progressives were working very hard and articulated a connection between war front and home front politics that if fascism, if authoritarianism was going to be fought effectively or consistently in those war theaters, what's going to happen at home with defense industry contracts, civil rights, internment camps, things like that. And popular music over the radio, through sheet music, through touring, becomes a powerful way to tell stories and change or help people feel as though we're part of something new or authentic or powerful.
Nice, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Sam.
And this is connected to what Owen just said, especially here in Pittsburgh, because around this time, around 1942, during the war, you had the Pittsburgh Courier establish the Double V campaign, which is basically victory over the Axis powers and victory for democracy at home. Came under a lot of criticism, were charged with sedition by the FBI, but it was really talking about freedom, and it did the opposite thing because the FBI felt that the Double V campaign was going to hurt their efforts to get African Americans to volunteer or enlist in the Army, and it did the opposite. It actually increased African American in recruitment and volunteerism in the Army. So this sort of goes along with the same rhetoric that was around the Double V campaign. Is talking about freedom, is talking about something beyond these events of World War II. It might be taking place in Europe and Asia, but the issues here at home still remain the same, and we need to connect it all.
Yeah. In fact, to build on your earlier point, this is when A. Philip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, is beginning to organize people to have a march on Washington to bring pressure for what becomes the Fair Employment Practices Commission. But again, that notion of mobilizing average grassroots people to then create a human petition that would come down to Washington, D.C. and demand, in some respects, pressure for changes in federal policy, which produces the FEPC, which, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, is the first federal civil rights, and it's an inch by inch, but it's the first federal civil rights move since Reconstruction. Anything else that you took away from this? Oh, go ahead, Owen.
I'll note that the performer was using a vernacular form of presentation, and he was performing as a folk artist, but without any hint of the minstrel tradition, without any of the regional stereotypes of accent or being imprisoned, being caricatured. He was speaking very forthrightly, almost like a union organizer, saying, this is the march forward here. And it's not patronizing in a way that in popular music or in popular performance, it was impossible in many cases for African Americans to perform in anything but degraded formats. that flattered white supremacist ways of understanding ourselves or things like that.
Well, Josh White is also a civil rights activist in and of himself. He hangs out with Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, and he is part of what become known as the Almanac Singers, who are this sort of radical folksy group, some of whom go on to the Highlander School, where they are trained, amongst other things, in nonviolent passive resistance, amongst other things, but they also then run afoul of the federal government and its oversight as well. Josh White would in fact find himself hauled before the McCarthyite committee that Sam mentioned earlier, trying to explain this notion of, at the very end of his song, where he sort of blurs the notion, I'm not going to we got to make this land safe for everybody, and I'm not going to let fascists or Nazis get in my way. I mean, there's sort of a very clear, it's blurry enough so you say, who's he really talking about, but also clear enough so you can say, oh, he means segregationists, so it's a great, I think it's a great twist. Whereas if you were looking at the world from a Jim Crow vantage point, like, oh, I clearly see the connection between his standpoint of the double V, victory at home and abroad against the forces of white racial supremacy. If you're thinking USA nationalism, you say, oh, I see the nationalism inherent in this. And I think that's what unites in my mind the Langston Hughes piece and this Josh White piece, is the sense that the American country itself isn't a country until it makes space for everybody.
Who was McCarthy's second in charge in those hearings? Anybody recall?
Oh my
that?
gosh, Roy Cohn, is that who you're talking about?
Well, he worked very hard for it, but a young Robert Kennedy was McCarthy's second in charge. Yeah. And so there were grave worries among all progressives that the Kennedy name was, well, they like to have it both ways. They like to have those votes. They also like to have that very staunch anti-communist reputation.
Just a quick aside, I'm going to show you exactly how much gray there is in my beard. I don't know if anyone has seen the CNN Cold War series recently or knows where to find it, but there's a great series, and I think it's just called, I think the chapter is called Reds, in which the series looks at, through the guise of Paul Robeson, the fusion of race and anti-communism and segregationism and anti-communism, and how they all came down against certain, especially progressives of color, to really draw clear lines about what was permissible dissent. So there's some interesting pieces that are going to spin out of this particular spot. Does anyone, we have got a couple minutes left. Does anyone have any other insights into this particular song? Anything else they want to share? Greg, are you moving or just shrugging? Oh, go ahead, Elena. I think Greg was just moving. It's hard to tell on Zoom. Elena, please go.
Well, I think this is a great place to tie it up, because you said, why are we calling this trip the March Down Freedom's Road? I think this song, this piece shows that you have to have a through line to history. You have to be able to understand what came before in order to fix what's wrong now and move into the future. And that's exactly what educators do. So that just, it's it all fits.
It's fantastic. Please remember Elena's comments when we go to places like Selma, and you will see signage everywhere that says the march continues. You'll be reminded throughout this trip that what we are studying is at once the past, but it is very much in the present. And we are going to be given a sort of almost like an intellectual baton through time, asking us, well, what are you doing now that you know? And once you see, you can't unsee. And so what are you doing with this knowledge? How are you continuing this particular march? Not to bring that great comment that Elena made down a little bit, but I'll make it just a little more, this is my final comment, which really wasn't, now it's not exciting. I liked Elena's much better. But this notion that there is a fusion between what is domestic and international, something Sam started us out with so nicely, is that we oftentimes think of Malcolm X as being the sort of carrier of an internationalist perspective. But if you look closely at civil rights activists from the 1920s and 1930s, in the words of Keisha Blaine, they are trying to set the world on fire. And if you haven't read Keisha Blaine's work, I ask you to. She's fantastic. But if we're going to look at the way in which this internationalist perspective not only infuses the concept of what constitutes rights, but also the way in which it inspires people to link freedom movements in the United States to freedom movements abroad as well. This notion that what's happening in Selma might just be about Selma, but it also might be about some much larger global movement towards a different type of transformed world. So I really thank you so much for digging in with me. I know it's really hard on Zoom. I apologize to Greg every time he moved. It seems like a call on the poor guy. But thank you so much for all of your comments, your words, and especially those of you who said you weren't historians. You're clearly budding young historians. So I'm very excited about that as well. We're going to have a fantastic time. Ellen, I pass the baton back to you.
Fantastic. I want to remind everyone, I just dropped in the chat about your post-seminar project commitment. I think I only have a couple people who have filled that out, and I apologize if you didn't get that in the last email. But
Ellen, I have an emergency. I have to go. I apologize.
Okay. Bye, Michael. We'll see you on the 4th of June. We will see you all on the 4th of June. It will basically be mostly a logistical meeting, again, with all the last minute questions that you have. I also want to remind you that our seminar pages have the access to all of these recordings, as well as the Zoom links to access all of our upcoming meetings, of which we only have one, and all the resources. So today, Michael mentioned a few things. Those I've added to the resource page. Excuse me. And if you're having trouble accessing it, let me know. I can get you one on the back end. I'm going to stop recording so I don't have